The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to get started with this webinar and we're excited for this topic. I just want to give a couple minutes for any last minute stragglers to join. So bear with us, make sure you can hear me, make sure you can see the slides on my screen, and we'll be back in just a few. All right, thank you everyone for joining us today and welcome. We're really excited to get into Get Aligned, Partner for Success with your hiring manager. And first, I wanted to go over the agenda of what we'll be talking about today. So first, we're going to be meeting our speakers. We have two in-house experts with us today. We're also going to have an example in action of how our two speakers were able to scale up the sales team here at Workable. Then we're going to go into the current state of recruiting and partnership. Then we'll go over some strategies for success. So these will be, what you can implement now for success in the long run. And we will be doing a Q&A at the end. If you guys have questions, feel free to add them as we go along in the webinar, and then we'll give you a couple minutes at the end to do that as well. So without further ado, we'll get into introductions. I'm Erin Hughes. I've been emailing you. I run programs here in the webinar program. And I'm very excited to introduce Rachel Bates. Rachel, why don't you talk to everybody about yourself?
Thanks, Erin. So, and thank you for everyone who's joined online. My name is Rachel Bates. I'm the VP of Sales at Workable. I've been here exactly 1 year. And I come with 15 years of experience specializing in inside sales. Hired hundreds of people in my past roles. I interviewed hundreds more. Workable, a year ago, there was 4 people in the sales team, and now we're at 45. So we've grown extensively over the last year, and I couldn't have done it without the help of my partner in crime, Elizabeth. So Elizabeth, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone on the call. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to be here. And we hope that you will find the content of this presentation helpful, if not meaningful. Along the way, you will learn some very helpful nuggets, and I'll kind of give you a cue when it's a good time to do some note-taking. But apart from that, much like Rachel, I too have approximately 15 years experience in the people operations space. I've worked for Fortune 500 companies. I've recruited fast, slow, shaped the workforces of lots of organizations of late in the SaaS, life sciences, as well as mobile ad tech space. So I've been parked at Workable for nearly 1 year now. And without further ado, I think we will let Rachel take over to talk about our example in action.
Yeah, so to paint a picture of the role I stepped into a year ago, we've had aggressive goals of hiring 40 hires in 6 months, which is more ambitious than anything I've ever seen before. The context of coming into this, Workable it's headquartered in Athens, Greece, with offices in London, but we really didn't have a brand name in Boston as a place to work for sales professionals. It's also highly competitive in Boston. So we weren't the only people looking to hire salespeople, especially Q1 of the year. And we were looking for 4 different roles. So I have account executives, account managers, sales development reps, and then managers fulfilling those roles. We are also recruiting for Greece and for Boston. And an important goal for me personally and for the company was to make sure that we had a good gender balance and diversity amongst the sales team. So a few things that came to mind was that we realized that we needed multiple hiring sources. So in addition to posting to the job boards, how did we do it? We tapped into my own personal network and also got the team engaged in, bringing in their own referrals. So we even had an example of one of our account executives, Sage. He recruited on an Uber pool to work. He met Will, who happened to be a sales development rep at another local company, told us about Workable, and then we interviewed Will, and lo and behold, he got the position. So we got creative. It was fun. One of the things, going ahead into this, was that hiring this many people, we needed to have a really consistent process. So salespeople are very good in interviews, and you can leave very much liking the people, but how do you make sure that you evaluate them along the way and that you're consistent with the questions that you're asking them, learning from it, and then also decreasing the time to fill those roles as well. And then what was the game changer to me was how do we do all this in a way that suits my everyday work process. So having a consistent process is great, but if it means that I need to fill in spreadsheets and go back to my desk and diligently enter stuff in, that isn't really the reality when you're running from meeting to meeting and on phone calls consistently. So one of the things to me which was different here was that I was able to use my mobile phone. I hold it up consistently when I tell the story about how many people we hired, because it was so critical. Every time the end of the day, you had a chance to reflect on the meetings of the day. I could input my evaluations, enter in, make quick decisions back and forth with Elizabeth about when we needed to help close a candidate. But it really became the tool in terms of making this happen. Hasn't always been the case. The normal feeling and hiring is, my experience has been, and I've had good relationships in the past too, but generally there's just feeling that the process is sluggish. It takes longer than you think. So whether that means from the original posting on the careers page, or just finalizing the job description to the time it takes to get candidates in, just always feels like it needs to be done yesterday, and it could be moving along quicker.
Yes, and then that brings us to poor candidate experience. So for all the talent acquisition professionals on the phone, I'm sure you're acutely aware of the fact you are the first point of contact for your applicant pool, whether they be candidates that are going to be moved through the process or disqualified. The bottom line is the process that you own, that you drive, can make either a super positive or super negative impression upon your candidate. So it's really important for you to own and drive a really excellent candidate experience through process.
Yeah, process and collaboration as part of that process, I think, is really important. So, too often I've found myself in situations where you've regrouped after meeting with candidates, and you realize you've asked them the exact same questions, and that doesn't benefit the candidate, it doesn't benefit us. So, I think understanding how the experience with the candidate also builds on our own evaluation process, so that we can gain that collaboration ahead of time of who does what. That's important too.
Yeah, and then when you have that relationship as you're building it and driving it with your hiring manager, you're in a much better place to make distinctions, to talk to your hiring manager about what is the so-called perfect profile or prototype. And until you really arrive at all of the must-haves that the qualified candidate for hire should have, again, you're in a much better place to increase your velocity and have excellent results with your hiring process.
Yeah, and other times of, losing out on the best talent. What does that mean? I've had examples in my past life where, there are times when you're going to lose best talent because it's competitive, and they might go to an awesome company, and in the end of the day, you're like, you know what, I understand why that role or company makes sense for them. That's going to happen, especially if you go for top talent. What, you know, sometimes this happens is that you feel like you've lost out on top talent because of your process. Like maybe we didn't get back to that person quick enough when they submitted their resume, or maybe we took too long making a decision. So I've experienced that many times before.
Excellent. Which leads us to communication bottleneck, which is an incredibly frustrating scenario, not just for your hiring manager, but for your candidate population as well. So again, as you are influencing the interview process, make certain that you're communicating to candidates, to hiring managers, to members of the interview team in a really timely fashion. So now we've talked about the pain points. We've talked about, by lack of not having a process, how that poorly impacts the entire process. So let's move along now to some strategies that will make you really successful in building a relationship with your hiring manager. And we'll start with what is known as a recruitment strategy meeting, or RSM. It is a really critical first step in the process. So once you've determined that you need an RSM, get yourself on the hiring manager's calendar sooner rather than later. Here's a learning nugget. Try to keep the appointment confined to 30 to 45 minutes. That should absolutely suffice in terms of the two of you covering all of the information that you're required to have to architect a successful process. And some of the things that you can do to prepare and make it a really meaningful 30 to 45 minutes. Take a proactive approach. There are myriad resources online. If you are working with an HR team and you don't have someone with a specialization in compensation, you can look at, for instance, salary.com, payscale.com online, and you can benchmark the role based on the skill set, the title, the geography that you're in. Secondly, again, take a proactive approach. Remember, your hiring manager is really busy running their line of business, and your specialization and expertise is really knowing the skills that someone needs to be successful in their role. So take a stab at developing a job description. So here at Workable, we make that super easy with our platform because we have drop-down job description templates. You can add, you can delete, etc. So there's plenty of room for personalization and creativity. But if that's not the scenario, if you don't have a platform that is going to help drive your results, my suggestion is you can just access a Google document and the two of you can kind of go back and forth with editing. But it really should be your first responsibility to develop the job description for your hiring manager. Thirdly, when you're sitting with your hiring manager, talk about how many stakeholders will be involved in the interview and decision-making process. Again, pick up your pens for an interesting learning nugget. So, as we probably all know, this is rather common sense. The more members it takes for people, the larger the group for decision-making process, the more challenging and difficult it is to reach consensus. So the recommendation here is for just about any role, try to keep it 4 interviewers max. Fourthly, talk about the sourcing strategy. This is super important. So earlier, as Rachel opened to talk about, it was during the pain point section, she talked about where we did not have really strong employment brand a year ago here in the Boston marketplace. We did have to get really creative about how we sourced for roles. So whether that means we're plugging into, new and unique digital channels to talk about our job, we partnered with a local organization called She Geeks Out so that we could have an event here and help with our diversity numbers. And again, the hiring manager should be chiming in and partnering with you as to which channels you're going to strategically plug yourself into. And then lastly, what does the evaluation process look like? So to the right of this slide, we see a scorecard. So again, Workable, our platform, we have drop-down scorecards that you can build yourself with probably more than 90 competencies. Again, we do leave room for you to customize the template, but you can measure everything from technical acumen to love for customer service. But again, it's really important that you talk about the competencies that are going to be measured to determine who is a fit and who is not during the interview process.
Yeah, and I think mapping that evaluation process and scorecard ahead of time is critical because when you get into the role, then if you don't do it ahead of time, you're heavily influenced by the people that you first interview. And then whether you have a digital scorecard, you do it online with Excel. My one recommendation is don't ever have a middle ground. So having a 3 out of 5 is probably the worst scenario. Have something where it's a clear no, yes, or definitely was really critical in being able to make clear decisions. So one of the things, an outcome from this could be like a service level agreement. That sounds pretty formal, and I think some cases it can be. I think we've both worked in places where we've had official SLAs. With Elizabeth and I we left this meeting and we said, all right, let's come up with an agreement from the start in terms of responsiveness. Like, yes, you might not hear from me 3 or 4 hours, but at the end of the day, I will promise I'll get back to you and evaluate on the candidate. What steps are there in the process? Like, so that's mapped out ahead of time and it's clarified. What about from Elizabeth? I think you have more opinions on competency.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So competency measurement. So what we mean by this is, again, let's think about candidate experience. If we have 3 to 4 stakeholders involved in the process, we don't want redundancy. We want everyone to be responsible and or own the competency that they're going to measure with each candidate. Again, this helps organizations arrive at, I think, a more sound decision with respect to a candidate's qualifications. And again, it does create a more buttoned up, pulled together candidate experience. Everyone is learning something new, both the candidate and the stakeholder at each stage and each discussion. And then lastly, a communication cadence. This goes a really long way, so pick up your pens and make sure to write down communication cadence. And what does this mean? So either weekly or biweekly, you are going to take ownership and get yourself on your hiring manager's calendar just to sit down and talk about, it can be anything from pipeline to the candidates in process, etc. But as we all know, the more time you spend getting to know someone, in this scenario, your hiring manager, the more seamless the relationship will be.
So step 2, managing the funnel. As a sales leader, I think about this quite a lot for business anyway, so this resonates with me, but I think for the hiring managers, it also makes sense. But what does that mean? It means visibility into the solution and understanding who your candidates are all along the way. Why is this important? First off, just knowing where to find the candidate information. I cannot underestimate this. I've spent so many times in my past 10 minutes before the interview. Where's the resume? Is it in the calendar invite? Is it not? Where do we print it off? Do we do it? Just having a consistent process of this is where it is. This is where I have the candidate information. Having a chance to review it ahead of time before you meet with the candidate is critical. Business decision making. So understanding the pipeline, what do we mean by that? How many people are applying for the job? How many people have got past, we think of those people, do we think are worth talking to, having up the phone screens? If we're hiring for multiple roles, how many people do we have at the interview stage? All of that is like really critical in terms of knowing, okay, if I need to hire 4 people, are we on track to doing it? So at various points, or a couple of points, I think, this really, having that visibility into the pipeline allowed me to make some business decisions, such as at one point we needed 6 SDRs in Boston, and I could tell that we didn't have the candidate pipeline to fulfill that. So we made a decision to use a company called LaunchSource, who specialize in hiring sales development reps. and we hired 2 of these, and we were able to get them in place within a couple of weeks. A second example was also knowing that it was a good use of my time to prioritize reaching out to my personal network as well to help with the hiring, as well as talking to the team about their own referrals as well. So all of this visibility into like what's going on allowed me to early decisions that made it more manageable rather than waiting for it to be too late. Thirdly, making it a repeatable process. So I think, we came up with the structure ahead of time, and obviously we refined it, and then we wanted to make it repeatable so that it helped to scale quickly. And then lastly, this is obviously important to me. It was like one of the strategic initiative of the year was building a team. I like that ownership and accountability. That was on me. Like if I was sat here a year from now, today, and I only had 20 people, we wouldn't be having this interview. So I wanted to own it. I wanted to have control and being able to make those business decisions while heavily relying on my relationship with Elizabeth to do what she does best with.
Thank you.
So thinking about who should drive the offer process, this was different for me this time. So the 2 examples that we have, the references and the extending the offer, these were things that I'd previously owned. And then for me this year working with, so just to give you a background, I think reference checking is super important. I think it tells me 2 things. One is how responsive a candidate is to get back to you with 2 people that can happy to talk to you. If they're not able to do that within a timely period, it's a little bit of a flag to me. And then secondly, it allows you to have a conversation around to also like what they'd be like to future managing. And Elizabeth, has even a question beyond that, which was really helpful, and then has some opinions on extending the offer, which I think has worked really well for us too. So Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to share your key question and why it's so good.
That's awesome. Thanks for your positive feedback, Rachel. Good. So as some of you, again, on the call, you're talent acquisition professionals, and you probably know that reference checking, if you're currently doing it, can be really time consuming because you're tracking down applicants, former managers, etc. So again, by your checking the references, you're being an objective party and you're providing, I think, a really valuable time-saving service to your hiring manager when you own this part of the process. So I'll give you a spoiler alert. It's a learning opportunity. So one of the most insightful questions that I have found that really helps a hiring manager get to know their new hire. The question that I ask is, what is your advice for us on how to best position this person for success? And what this question essentially does, we are finding out about all of the strengths that the candidate is bringing to the organization, but it also gives us a sense of how this person, for instance, you may have someone who doesn't work well in an open environment, and that will be revealed in this question. The person with whom you're speaking might say, well, this individual is prone to distraction, so maybe, if you've got a more quiet place for them to sit. So that's a somewhat recent example I have for one of my candidates that we were extending an offer to. And then lastly, so now we are talking about extending the offer. So I'm going to give you 2 points of advice here. The first guiding factor is, and again, this is something that Rachel has owned in the past, a lot of hiring managers have. It's really a good practice for the talent acquisition professional to extend the verbal and written offer to the candidate. Reason number 1 simply goes to accuracy. As we know, the moment we involve a 3rd or 4th person in the discussion, so vis-a-vis the hiring manager, maybe the hiring manager's director in an extreme situation, but if that's the case, there is the room for error. The more people that are involved, talking about the offer, you certainly don't want to run the risk of an incorrect number being communicated. In the state of Massachusetts, a verbal offer of employment is as binding as a written offer of employment. That's really important because there have been lots of lawsuits around inaccurate offers being extended that were verbal. So we want to avoid that. So accuracy is key. Number two, so the second reason for this also is that I was giving this some thought yesterday. I would say more than 70% of the candidates that I go out with a verbal offer to, more than 70% actually want to negotiate the offer. So whether they're asking for a bump in the base compensation, around equity, around bonus, PTO, you name it, or any other perk, it's best to keep that discussion contained between you and the candidate. Why? You don't want, it can create a really awkward moment, I think, for someone to have to negotiate with their future manager. So this provides an opportunity, for you, again, to sort of drive that dialogue. And when you do close the offer, the new hire will come into the office. You will avoid that new hire having to have a really uncomfortable conversation with their manager. And that certainly will not put anyone on their best footing starting a new role. All right, so we talked about how to run a really smooth and seamless process. So this slide here, you can see at the center, the nucleus is partnership. And the six captions here, we have all of the really positive outcomes that happen when you drive a really efficient, buttoned up process. All right, so for those of you who've remained on the call, thank you so much. What we would like to offer to you at this time, we have a super helpful link that's referenced here on the slide. Here at Workable, we have one of the most exceptional content teams I've worked with in my career. And we have a plethora of resources for you to plug into. So again, you might work at a startup. You might have very limited resources. Maybe you are a one-man or one-woman band on your HR talent acquisition team. And there are things that you're just not sure of. You don't have expertise. Please click on the link below and you can find myriad articles on everything from compensation, how to develop a hiring plan, even content that was discussed here today. In addition to, you can also look at our scorecards, our interview templates and job descriptions, etc.
I believe it's the #1 HR site in the world, right?
That's right, Rachel, with 1.3 million unique visitors per month.
That's good.
All right. Thank you so much to our speakers. That was great. I hope you learned something new and something valuable. And if you still have remaining questions, we would love to take them at this time. So I'm going to give everyone about a minute to kind of get their questions together and send them in for us. So why don't you take time now and I'll catch up with you in about 30 seconds. All right, we're going to jump right into it. So our first question is, how did you ensure they were a fit? What was your % success rate and how did you onboard them? So this goes back to hiring a sales team. So I guess when you're hiring at that scale, how do you make sure that you're doing it well?
That's wow. We could spend probably half an hour on each of these things, but yeah. At a high level, these were, how do we ensure they were fit? We looked at the key factors that we thought would be successful. One of the things was, as a new sales team, was that people needed to have a tolerance for ambiguity, right? You could be a good sales professional and have a very structured territory and come into a role, and we knew that that wasn't an environment that was going to be the case. We were building the runway as we were taking off. So just ensuring that we're finding people who could handle that, setting their expectations for that, and finding people who would be excited by that environment was really important. Another example was that this is an international company. So there's a couple of things related to that. They got to 6,000 customers without a sales team, A, and then B, the main office is in Greece. So I also there was two factors which were interesting that I looked for. One was people who had international experience, whether that be study abroad or traveling, and generally like enjoyed that global environment. And secondly, like a humility, right? Like I think coming into an environment where they've done very well without sales, we need to be modest and respectful of the way that they've done. So those are three unique things to this role, which is things that I looked out for. Percentage success rate, I think we've got 45 right now. We would have been at, I think, a couple of people along the way. Perhaps didn't work out. How did we onboard them? I have to give huge credit to Becky, my director of operations. She helped structure this as well. And we've been doing lots of training throughout the year, our product systems, everything like that. We've been doing, so hiring was the first half of the year. Onboarding, I'd say Q2, Q3, we spent a lot of time doing that.
Great, thank you. So for the next question, somebody actually asked how large Workable is. And especially like in a large company, it might be really important to know your hiring manager since you'll be a little more siloed. I think right now, Elizabeth, do you have a number?
I believe the current headcount, it hovers between 173 to 175 employees globally. Yeah.
Great. Let's see. Okay, so how can you decide if a new hire who terminated quickly is a hiring mistake or a development mistake?
Do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. So I think that as a practice, and fortunately, we've not had a high termination or attrition rate here as we've scaled not only Rachel's team, but others within the organization. With that said, we tend to take a really kind of a post-mortem lessons learned approach. And we always backtrack. We look at interview notes. We talk about, were there internal stakeholders who might have had concerns? Did we not listen to those concerns the way we perhaps should have? Again, what did the references say? And again, we take that feedback into consideration to get it right the next time around.
Perfect. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Sure.
We have another really great question, which actually relates to us being a software company. So this person said, as a software company people resource, I struggle at times really understanding the needs of the hiring manager. How do you recommend he obtain a better understanding of the needs of the hiring manager for a technical position?
Would you like me to take that one?
I have a couple of thoughts from the hiring manager's perspective, and also worked with other teams.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes starting is the hardest part, right? So they say come up with a job description. They're not writing job descriptions all day, so it's like giving them a task, which is like kind of painful, but they also need it. So I've seen hiring managers in the past take 3 weeks over this because they're trying to perfect it, and it's not what they do all day. So I think come to the table with something. It's probably only 50% right, but there's templates out there, and then create it. And then the second thing is perhaps look at some profiles of people and then say, what is it that you like about them? And then think about pulling that in to help customize the job description.
Yeah, and another thought, and I agree with everything that Rachel has said. So it's interesting that the person who's asking the question, it's in a technical setting. And, not to cast a sweeping generalization, but as we know, sometimes if you're working with engineering teams, CTOs, et cetera, they tend not to be the most personable people. So that's where it's really imperative that you take the lead to build the relationship, get on the calendar, and make certain that you're doing it at a date and time that is most convenient for them. The bottom line is just make it easy for them. You are, giving them an incredibly valuable service, and just be pleasantly persistent. So that's my other hint.
Great, thank you. We have another question. So if an offer has been extended, how long is polite to wait before nudging the candidate to get back to you? Elizabeth, this seems like a question for you.
Yeah, sure, thank you. Yep, no, I love that question. So I'm not waffling, but it's kind of it really depends, I think, upon the scenario. So let me talk about a recent one. We had a candidate in our office here last Wednesday for an interview. We ran a really fine process, if I do say so myself, not to my credit, but to everyone who was involved. And so that was Wednesday. By Thursday, I went out with both a verbal and written offer. So my expectation of this candidate was she had the offer in hand by noon Thursday. And I said, I thought, and I talked to the hiring manager about it as well, because it's just not my decision. Again, we're working a partnership here. And I asked her if it was reasonable if she could get back to me by Monday. So she had the rest of Thursday, Friday, the weekend. At that time, she did say to me that, I'm in process with 3 other companies. So we negotiated from there in terms of, so we gave her nearly 1 week. We gave her 2 extra days. But if I extend, the rule of thumb is if I extend on a Thursday or Friday, I do ask that someone get back to me by Monday or Tuesday of the following week. So hopefully that's helpful.
Great. Yes, definitely. We have another really great question here. How do you get really busy hiring managers to commit to meetings in a hiring system? Maybe if you're new to being a talent acquisition manager, and especially at a large company who doesn't have an ETS in place.
So whomever asked the question, I feel for you because, in absence of an ATS, it is difficult to be successful, and I don't think I have to tell you why that is. But I think half the battle is really just, getting on the calendar. And the advice that I gave a moment ago to the person who's struggling in a technical environment, make it convenient, make it easy for your hiring manager. Maybe you even do it outside of the office. Some hiring managers, their practice is to come in really early and maybe suggest, hey, I can meet you for coffee. Do you want to meet down the street for coffee? And make it a really pleasant experience.
Great, thank you very much. I have another one here. When presenting a candidate, do you send over a blurb along with the resume? How do you usually present candidates to hiring managers in a helpful way?
Yeah. So fortunately here at Workable, one of our slides, we did have an example of the scorecard. So it's pretty, again, seamless for me to drive a really consistent process with each candidate I'm speaking with. I'm measuring the same competencies. And then, so in addition to, to having the, typing in the notes in the competency bracket, I'm also able to provide a conclusion as to whether or not, here's my recommendation, or here, apart from the competency measurement, here are some other things I detected that make this person really fascinating.
Yeah.
And then here are some perceived negatives as well that might not have been covered.
And there's a prioritization of that as well. So like when Elizabeth would see someone like, I think a couple of really top candidates that we had, like the prioritization system on our end was like definitely or yes or no. Like clearly I'm not that interested in seeing the no's unless it was someone I wanted to follow up on. But if it was a definitely, all I saw was the definitely, and I knew to prioritize and to read into the details.
Definitely, yeah. Great, thank you for that input. Okay, we have another question. What is a good way to let a hiring manager know that their expectations, like hiring a high volume of candidates in a short period of time, are unreasonable?
I don't want to ever hear that. No.
Or maybe just going back to differing expectations. Like maybe it's a hard to fill role and just kind of showing your point of view as a talent acquisition manager.
Yeah, so one of the slides earlier in the presentation, we talked about, essentially expectation setting. And this is where if you do your research prior to the recruitment strategy meeting, you're in a unique position to educate your hiring manager on the time to fill reality. that, again, let's look at, for instance, Rachel's sales roles. We're in a super competitive market. I mean, Boston has been considered one of the most, technologically innovative entrepreneurial cities in the country. So there truly is a fight for your A players. So again, I think take it from this perspective of, you're building a business case. You're going in with data.
Yeah, I think that's critical. I laughed at first, but reality is some of my knowledge now comes from experience, right? Just knowing that it takes that long, and that's why I like the pipeline management. Where Elizabeth helps me now is specific, like more individual roles and just understanding the market from that, because she has a closer eye to the pulse. I think letting hiring managers know unreasonable expectations, perhaps if they're new hiring managers, they're inexperienced in this. So presenting any type of data you have about, like, here's how long any role takes to fill, and then here's why your role might be even harder than that, would give them perspective. Because I think from their standpoint, they might not know, or they might have seen one example, but any type of data you have overall about how long it takes to typically hire a company would be helpful.
Yeah, and also just jumping in here, if you're not sure where to get some of that data, Workable's resources section, again, has a lot of information about that. And we actually have a benchmarking tool, so you can see in your industry what is the average time to fill.
Yeah.
So like if they're looking for someone in a week, you can show them how long it generally takes. I'll be sure to send that out. And I know a couple people have asked me to go back for a couple slides. We will be sending out this presentation and the recording afterwards, so you can look through at length on your own time. We have another question here. RE, the meeting with a hiring manager in a software company. They should have a series of set meetings to review how things are going and to cross-check findings. So I guess this person is just showing his best practices, making sure that you are following up and keeping that constant stream of communication.
Awesome, thank you.
Another thing is, how would you measure cultural fit within the scoring system?
So that comes back to stakeholders. So just to give you an example, so we ahead of time, I have someone, like when I'm meeting with them, it's really about the skills and competencies, and but I have someone specifically assigned to meet with the person and make that assessment about cultural fit as well. So
yeah, and then some of the criteria that Rachel discovered that's important, and particularly for her team. We want people who have studied abroad, who really have a global perspective, given that a bulk of the majority of employees sit in Athens, Greece. We've got a few in London, etc.
Global customer base.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, most important.
Somebody actually asked you to repeat that question a hiring manager should ask, or I think this is in response to the question to ask during references to help out.
Oh, yeah, sure. So, so here's the question. What is your advice in terms of how we position this person for success?
Great. So that looks like most of the questions we have. Like I said before, we will be sending out the slides to everyone, so don't worry about that. But yeah, thank you everybody for all of your questions and your feedback. And I hope you'll join us for the next one. Thank you to Rachel and Elizabeth for a great job. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.